Please welcome the Orlando Children's Choir. Please welcome President and Chief Executive Officer at IANACOL, Susan Patrick.
Welcome back, and thank you again to the Orlando Children's Choir. Let's give them another big round of applause. Thank you so much. Thank you for reminding us why we take on all of this work. And I love the theme of the songs that you've sung on Rise Up and Rise. And we have to constantly be lifting ourselves up to remind ourselves of the importance of the work and how this is only going to happen when we're all working together. Yesterday, you heard from amazing practitioners undertaking the work, and today we're focusing on the systems change side. And we all know that systems change can be a challenge, but we must have hope because this has been done. And it has been done in places around the world, and it's also been done in the United States. So if you've ever asked yourself, how can we do this in our state? Now's your chance to hear. We're going to hear how this was moved from vision to reality in the state of New Hampshire. This session is on leading systems change, transforming to student-centered learning. And we'll hear the systems perspective and also how a student experiences it. I am so pleased today to welcome our three keynote speakers. The first speaker and TED Talk is Rose Colby. Rose Colby is a competency-based learning and assessment specialist assisting schools in designing high-quality competency, assessment, and grading reform systems in many states. She's a Talent Cloud Fellow for Two Revolutions, an education design firm, and she has served as an competency education consultant for the New Hampshire Department of Education and currently teaches in the Educational Leadership Program at Plymouth State University. And if you haven't seen it, Rose Colby has a new book that has just come out from Harvard Education Press titled Competency-Based Education, A New Architecture for K-12 Schooling. So Rose, I'm giving you a shout out on your book. It's an excellent book, walks you through the steps. Rose and Paul are both members of the National Advisory Board and contributors, and I would say significant contributors, to Competency Works, the national clearinghouse and resource for innovative practices in competency education. Our next TED Talk speaker is Paul Leather. I could say so much about Paul's work over the last 20, 40 years in competency-based education. We would be nowhere near where we are in the field if it wasn't for Paul's, and I will say, tireless leadership. Paul has just shifted from his role as Deputy Commissioner at the New Hampshire Department of Education to the Director for State and Local Partnerships at the Center for Innovation in Education. So now he is working with states across the US. His background in education, counseling, administration, and policy in New Hampshire spans 4 decades. He served as the Deputy Commissioner for the Department of Education in New Hampshire for 8 years and the Director of Career, Technology, and Adult Learning for the department for 18 years, including leading high school redesign, extended learning opportunities, and dropout prevention. Paul led the development of a first-in-the-nation, next-generation educational accountability model. This is huge. It's called the Performance Assessment of Competency Education, or PACE, and was approved by the U.S. Department of Ed as a pilot program in March of 2015. Paul worked to create a competency-based student transcript that ultimately led to the student mastery model in New Hampshire. And our last TED Talk this morning is Yvonne Armenta. Yvonne Armenta is a recent graduate from the University of California, Berkeley. She's the first member of her family to graduate from high school and attend college. Yvonne graduated from the Metropolitan Arts and Technology High School and Envision School in San Francisco in 2013, where she defended her work through the college portfolio defense to an audience of teachers and staff. These experiences throughout her high school career gave her the confidence she exudes today when public speaking and storytelling in her academic and professional life. She is an advocate for Envision education and project-based learning in hopes that others may recognize the power of their voice and through it find their passion. We are grateful to have these 3 TED Talks this morning to explore leading systems change and experiences in student-centered learning. I would now like to welcome author Rose Colby. Let's give a warm welcome to Rose.
Thank you, everyone. And I'm so honored to share the stage today with both Paul and Yvonne. And I'd also like to thank you for the opportunity for sharing time with you today to share the new architecture for K-12 schooling in America today. We're at an important crossroads in education. We can choose the path that will bring our students to the present and the future, or we can choose the pathway that we've been following for the past 100 years in education. I'd like to ask you a simple question. What does it take to get a handshake at graduation in your school system? Is it based on a discrete number of credits earned, sometimes with a grade of D? Or is it based on a set of performance criteria that each graduate must demonstrate? Several years ago, I was mentoring a school principal. The day after graduation, he asked to speak with me. On a day that should have been filled with reflection and a sense of accomplishment, he was sad. As we began talking, I soon came to realize his melancholy. For the first time as a principal, he was handing out diplomas. And as students approached him for the handshake at graduation, he knew that some of them just weren't college ready. They had earned the credits for graduation, but they simply were not ready for the next phase of their lives. This blindsided him, and it blindsided me also. Let's think about this. Think about all of the parts of our lives that are touched by people in different professions. We have our medical teams, we have our car technicians, we have our accountants, and we have our tradespeople. We put our trust in them when we use their services. Our medical teams will heal our illnesses, our car technicians will fix our cars, our accountant will prepare our tax returns, and our tradespeople will keep our homes safe and secure. We put our trust in these people because their professions demand of them performance criteria before they're licensed or receive their certificates. They simply aren't licensed unless they've demonstrated competency. The world works this way, my friends, except in education. Can we say that a high school graduate holding one of our diplomas is in fact competent? How can we know this when the grading and the transcripts for a high school diploma differ from school to school or from state to state? And rarely is it based on performance criteria. And we wonder why education comes under such scrutiny. So what does college and career readiness actually mean then? Ask your parents, ask your students, ask your teachers, ask your paraprofessionals, ask your bus drivers, ask your cafeteria workers, ask your local politicians, and ask your business community members. If they're like the many focus groups that I've conducted in many communities, it's going to look like this. As you examine what many people think is needed for that graduation handshake, you need to know that many of the characteristics that are represented in red here really represent common answers across multiple audiences in many communities. And you know what? This actually also lines up with what our research tells us is what college and career readiness actually is. What's equally important is that the information is in stark contrast to what's on a high school diploma, or a high school transcript, I should say. But if we need to rely on a high school transcript, I think probably what should be on it is something that looks like this. We actually should be communicating college and career readiness on a set of proficiencies that you see right before you now. I call these personal success skills. This is a term that resonates a little bit better with the public and with parents, instead of 21st century skills, non-cognitive skills, and dispositions. Parents and the public just don't really understand what that means, but they do understand personal success skills. I think we've reached a point in the work that we're doing where we come to the essential question: do our schools, does your school, both teach and assess what we value in preparing students for the future. I think we're going to have to look back at the NCLB era as a time in education that's probably one of the darkest eras in education history. Teaching and learning were reduced to coverage of standards with widespread paper and pencil testing that just sucked the joy out of teaching and learning. We've essentially been trying to fix the kids to fit our system. But the system just can't be fixed any longer. I think we need to ask ourselves if the time has finally come to transform or substantially or fundamentally rebuild the system that supports student learning. Remember, we have built the system that produces our graduates, but we have built the system that have produced our dropouts. As educators, we can and should do more to make our diplomas signify that anyone holding that certificate has met a standard of performance. For that reason, we need to shift from the traditional approach of teaching and learning to a new approach, where we design nimble systems in which students learn at their pace and demonstrate competency throughout their personal pathway to graduation. Over the past 10 years, I've been honored to work with many educators in many states doing this hard work in building competency education systems. And over that time, I began to realize that the traditional pillars that we have in education of curriculum, instruction, assessment, and grading have changed. We need different supports or different architecture for the work that we're doing in building personalized competency-based systems. Let's take a look at what the architecture looks like. In the architecture of competency education, we rely on really high-quality competency design. We look for building a system of performance assessments. Personalized learning pathways. We're talking a lot about that in these few days. And finally, dynamic grading. Let's take a look at each one of those with a little bit of detail. Competencies are not standards. I'm going to say it again, a little louder and a little slower. Competencies are not standards. They're robust, big ideas. They grow in complexity as a student learns across the K-12 continuum. It's a continuum of learning progressions, of essential content and skills, but also of reasoning skills. Think of taking your current curriculum up out of grade level, and students would move across that. But as they move across the learning progression, some kids struggle or just get stuck. They need more time to learn before they move on. And you know what? Some kids already know it, and they just need to move on. In this part of the architecture, this is where we put those personal success skills. These are the skills that are best assessed by the student themselves. We know that metacognition and reflection are really important for kids to understand their own personal growth. And this needs to be part of their development from the earliest stages of learning right through to graduation. Performance assessment. It's at the heart and core of competency education. Cognitively demanding performance tasks provide the vehicle for unpacking content and skills into performance indicators as the evidence that students can apply those content and skills within or across content areas. This is what certifies competency. An important instructional shift in all of this, and it's one of the difficult ones as we move into competency education, is that we have to shift from teaching just in case it's on the test to learning just in time the content and skills that would be necessary to engage in the performance task and its assessment. Personalized learning pathways represents another shift Because now, instead of teachers owning the teaching for the learning, students have to own their own learning. This is what personalization is all about. And because each student comes to the table of learning differently, we need to provide varied learning experiences. They need face-to-face learning. They need blended opportunities and online learning. And they need community-based learning opportunities. And this is why we term this learning pathways and not instruction. This is where students exercise their choice, their voice, and their agency in these deeper learning opportunities. Grading. Ooh. Traditional grading systems just don't work with competency-based education. We have to, in a competency-based environment, reduce teacher variability and subjectivity and increase the reliability. Performance-based assessment demands a better system of grading K through 12. Our grading systems need to stay open over time so that we can best assess the student's pathway and growth along that continuum. But be careful. This isn't where you begin competency education reform in your schools or your districts. I think one of the important pieces and parts of competency-based grading is the development of a K through 12 grading philosophy statement. This might be new for some people, but many folks in New Hampshire have been doing this work over several years. And it's a very important part as an anchor to the work that you're doing over the years that you're developing your work. What a grading philosophy statement basically does is that it norms all of the grading practices K through 12. And so doing, it's going to reduce the variability and increase the reliability of what those grades mean, regardless of who looks at those grades. It really provides a transparent and a very easily understood communication to our public. And we need to do that with our grading systems that we currently have. But it actually takes several years for shareholders in a system to develop this grading philosophy statements. It's in this development that we engage our parents in these conversations and also our students, if we can. I want to put it all together for you because it sounds like a lot of work, and it really is. But along the way, as we engage in this work and teachers doing the hard work of this, I've found that there's stumbling blocks in the process. And if I were to look at that architecture, I'd say in the area of competency design, I think really working that curriculum through so that you're raising it up out of grade level, you're really thinking through the cognitive demand and the reasoning skills that are part of learning, is something that takes time and is going to have you really put a lot of work into it, okay? In the area of performance tasks, our teachers have to develop those performance tasks that are embedded in the curriculum. So as leaders, we have to provide the time for teachers to work together during the school day to get this work done. It's collaborative work, and it's high-quality professional learning community work. And I think the next thing is the one that really, we all know this should really be what we do, but we have such a hard time in traditional systems to do it. And that's that formative assessment should trigger relearning, not summative assessment. This is where we kind of go wrong with standards-based grading. We wait until a student fails a summative assessment, then we talk about relearning and reassessment at the summative level. But all of our research tells us it's formative assessment, rich formative assessment, that provides us, as the assessors, the evidence that we need to have to engage with the student in learning at that point in time before they come to the table for summative assessment. The learning pathways, as I've mentioned, really is a way that students need to be supported all along the way. And in traditional systems where we think about differentiation as a means of group support for learning, we have to think deeply about how to support each student. And that's really something that comes in question for systems to talk about So that shift is really an important one, I think, as we look at things. Finally, when we look at the dynamic grading, I spoke about that a few minutes ago, but taking the time and not rushing into this work. Many districts that I've gone into, they've already started the work of grade reform and put things out formally to parents before they've actually figured out what their competencies are, how they're going to be assessing the personal success skills, or even developing performance tasks on which competency is determined. So we need to take our time with this part of this framework. So this really is a new ecosystem of learning. It's not a fixed curriculum, and it forces us to take a really serious look at how we do our work. For many of you here today, you've already begun that work. For others who are new, you're just beginning it. Look to the models. Take it into your thinking and design the system for your students that's going to work best for your professional learning and your cultures for learning in your schools. What will competency education look like 10, 15, or 20 years from now? If we do this right, it will evolve and it will have grown to be more responsive to society's needs for an educated workforce. Our educators will be using a toolkit of resources that's just emerging today. We'll be using technology in our industry the way it's used in other industries. And we'll be providing greater equity and access for our kids all along the way through their pathways to graduation. So here's your challenge. If you'll be telling your story 5, 8, or 10 years from now, what will you have to say? Join the many school leaders and teachers who firmly believe that personalized, competency-based learning is our future, unshackled by the past. Thank you.
Please welcome Director for State and Local Partnerships at the Center for Innovation in Education, Paul Leather.
Morning, everyone. There's so many people that I really need to recognize for being up here. Certainly Rose Colby. For years, she was New Hampshire's primary competency education consultant. Also, Marianne Gaffrere, who at the Department of Education was with me for the last 20 years as we built our competency-based system. And the commissioners and deputy commissioners who supported us all along the way, including folks like Nick Donahue, who now at Nellie Mae, and Ginny Berry, just to name two, who provided brilliant forward-looking leadership during their years of service. I also want to thank Susan Patrick, who is such a tremendous leader and a good friend, as well as Jean Wilhoit and Linda Pittenger. It's great to stand on the shoulders of giants. Although this is meant to be kind of a TED Talk format, I'm going to share with you a slice of New Hampshire's story, and I'm going to stay close to my script so I don't go on for 45 minutes. I bet you didn't expect to see this face looking out at you this morning. Yes, this is Arnie Duncan. Our story starts in Manchester, New Hampshire, just a few short weeks after Arnie was confirmed as U.S. Secretary of Education. Fred Bramante, who had been our state board chair of education in New Hampshire, and I had 15 minutes with Arnie right after he had given a presentation in Manchester. And Arnie came into the meeting, and he had this kind of hollow look. It was as if he really just had no idea what he was doing there and what the purpose was of our meeting. So we talked. We told him that we wanted to scale competency-based education that we had been working on for some years, and that we were moving into the aspect of personalized learning and student-centered learning, that we wanted to transform our system. Well, as you can well imagine, this was pretty far from Arnie's agenda. And he was really looking to double down on No Child Left Behind at that point in time. but we had a vision of another way. Students could own their own learning. We had the tools. We had proof points in our state. And we saw authentic work that could be scaled. But Arnie just sat there and kind of looked at us, asked us a few questions, and it seemed like he was having trouble comprehending what we were telling him. And then suddenly he was gone. He was whisked off to meet with Mayor Ted Gatsas of Manchester. And the next day he toured Bakersville Elementary School, and the mayor took him to tour the projects that surrounded the school, known as Rock Rimmon. And as part of his tour, he saw compliant children, he saw caring parents, he saw engaged teachers, and a principal who was marked for termination. Because, as you can well imagine, that school was a focus school under No Child Left Behind. And Arnie famously said, as he was leaving, well, this wasn't what I meant when I talked about closing failing schools. Well, the fact of the matter is, Bakersville was failing, leaving too many children behind in truth, lost on the streets and alleys of Rock Rimmon, the halls of Bakersville. This grim reality stiffened our resolve because we had seen another way. We had first seen another way when Fred and I visited MC Squared, Monadnock Community Connection School in the western part of our state. Kim Carter and Elizabeth Cardine were amazing educators who were pursuing personalized learning. And we saw a culminating graduation demonstration by Pat from Hinsdale. Pat was like a young wolfling, if you will. He could run fast, he could talk fast, he was cunning, but you know, sometimes he made the dumbest mistakes. When he was asked, where would you be right now if you had not come to MC Squared, he said, oh, there's no doubt, I'd be in prison. His passion was a junked-up old Toyota, a Supra, and it was up on blocks in front of his house in Hinsdale. But Pat left Hinsdale kind of under a cloud, left Hinsdale High School, and he went on to MC Squared, where he pursued a series of internships. First one in auto repair, no big surprise there. And then on to a local factory, where he learned about Kaizen. And then finally in a business office, where he took up accounting. And all along the way, he was involved in personal treks and competency-based academic engagement. He earned 20-plus credits through dual enrollment and was going on to Keene State College, going on to college in accounting. And so all through Pat's presentation, his mother just cried. And those of us who have sat through culminating experiences know that that's not that unusual. But what was surprising were the educators from Hinsdale and Keene and the other surrounding towns sitting there. They were astounded as Pat showed the silver Supra that he still had around his neck, discussed how he had gotten hold of the demons to become the learner and the adult he was while following his passion. So Fred and I left there with our eyes opened. We had seen another way. And so over the next few years, we advanced competency education and student-centered learning and started to see similar results all across our state. But then we hit a brick wall. Rose spoke about it a few minutes ago. Standards-based assessment and accountability stood in the way of personalized learning, where the annual state test drove curriculum a mile wide and an inch deep. And it was antithetical to students following their passion. Students could not own their own learning, and educators were driven by the test. I was reminded at the time of a song, Little Pink Houses, of holding an image of schools all in a row as tenements, and students as vagrants, and educators as tenants in their own schools. So to escape this picture of hopelessness, we looked for help nationally for another way. We found it in this building at the Hewlett Foundation, a beautiful building overlooking the Pacific and Menlo Park in California. For 8 years, New Hampshire was a member of the Council of Chief State School Officers in the Innovation Lab Network, led by Jean Wilhoit and Linda Pittenger. It was funded by Hewlett, seeking to advance deeper learning in the midst of No Child Left Behind. In early spring, 4 years ago, 30 folks gathered for 2 days. Jean was one of them there, Linda Darling-Hammond, many folks who you would know, Michael Fullen, Nick Donahue, Andy Calkins, who's here in the audience, Bob Lenz, among others. And together, we designed the 51st State Accountability Model. Local student-centered friendly assessments combined with grade span checks on proficiency, a system that gave back to local educators and parents their system of education. So I took that new accountability model home to New Hampshire and met with educational leaders frustrated with our current system, and several of us got together and made the system work for New Hampshire. Scott Marion from the Center for Assessment, Dan French from the Center for Collaborative Education, and Ginny Berry, our commissioner. And we created a theory of action. If we want students to be college and career ready, then they must demonstrate their competence all along the way, and educators must be prepared to support their students. But we realized that educators, and we had great educators in New Hampshire, they were well trained and experienced, but no matter how good, they were not prepared for this new challenge. And so we began a series of in-depth professional development activities. Our goal was to support student agency by empowering educator agency, to raise educator capacity for quality formative assessment, learning progressions, complex performance tasks, student-centered, competency-based education environments, all the things that we talk about and you heard Rose speak about a few minutes ago. And as this work got underway and we got into it for a couple years, we realized we were ready for another talk with Arnie. This time, Arnie had been briefed and asked really tough questions. Are New Hampshire schools and educators ready to do this? Has your system been constructed? Will it meet technical quality requirements? Is there a general consensus to move forward in the New Hampshire community? How will you know that it is working? How are you defining mastery of competencies? And how will you know you are meeting the mark set by your theory of action? Well, these were really tough questions. And we had worked many of them out, but not all of them out, and none of them all completely. And so we went back and we rolled up our sleeves and we accelerated our professional development schedule across the state and convened forward-looking educators and asked them to co-construct the system with us. And we started a system of large-scale co-construction of common performance tasks from elementary to middle to high school and established a technical advisory committee. And they recommended that we have state-level competency definitions, which are now on our the department's website, as well as create a formative evaluation process of our work over time, which is on the Center for Innovation Education's website if you'd like to take a look. After 2 years of this deep work, we were sitting with our state accountability task force, and one of our most respected senior superintendents, Chris Rath of Concord, said to me, Paul, we are with you on this, but we have to have some help here and we would like to see you meet us halfway. We need some relief from the current system. We're 2 years into implementing the Common Core state standards. This is our first year with Smarter Balanced Assessment System. And with all of this going on, it's hard for us to respond to these new ideas, which we all believe to be the future. Please, please give us space to innovate. What can you do for us? And so we went back to Arnie. And at this time, Deb Delisle was now the Assistant Secretary of Elementary Secondary Education. She had been the former chief of the state of Ohio and a founding member of the Innovation Lab Network. And so we went for a full year of face-to-face meetings with the U.S. Department of Ed and innumerable phone calls. And then came a fateful meeting at the U.S. Department of Ed on the 7th floor with Arnie and his staff. And Commissioner Berry, Scott Marion, and I, we described our new system and all the work we'd put into it. But then came a key moment, and Arnie asked, so much of this system is based on the judgment of local educators. How do we know they can and will do this? And so we then asked Ellen Hume Howard, who was the coordinator of curriculum and instruction at the Sanborn Regional School District, one of our lead districts, and she spoke to the large-scale professional development she was going through with her teachers. She talked about the curriculum maps she had constructed and the common performance tasks and the calibrated scoring and moderation process they were going through and the standard setting that they were working with other districts. And Arnie, after 10 minutes, said, "If everyone who came here had done the kind of prep work that you have done, we would support more innovative practice all across this country." Today, we're in the 4th year of our system. We've grown from 4 districts to 24 districts, and 1/3 of New Hampshire students are involved in this PACE, Performance Assessment of Competency Education. We've been closing performance gaps and demonstrating that it works as a real accountability system. But that's a story for another day. I told you this slice of the New Hampshire story not to brag on us or on me or any of the folks I mentioned, but to encourage you, to give you hope for the future. Remember, when we first met Arnie, he didn't know what we were talking about, but we persisted. We created a dialogue with him and his key staff. They took tours of New Hampshire schools. They took a full look under the hood of our system, and then they asked tough questions, and we responded. We persisted. We built a committed group of educators who would not take no for an answer. We created an authentic dialogue and answered all of their questions and then some that they hadn't even thought of, because we saw another way. In a couple months, a new opportunity, Susan mentioned this in the opening, a new opportunity opens for all of us. Section 1204, the Innovative Assessment and Accountability Demonstration, will be opened as a competition by Secretary DeVos. 1204 was largely designed after our experience with PACE. But you know what? You don't have to do PACE. You need to design something that works for your students, for your educators, and for your state. If you persist, if you see another way, and stay true to your vision, you too can take back your public education system from the state and federal government for your educators, for your parents, and most importantly, for your kids, and create a future where students can own their learning and ultimately own their future success. This is the challenge before all of us. I know if you choose to pick it up, that you will be successful. Thank you.
Please welcome Yvonne Armenta.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. Again, my name is Yvonne, and today the title of my presentation is Creating Innovative and Passionate Barrier Breakers. And the reason for this is because I am going to talk to you a little bit about my experience with project-based learning and how I believe that it really does create innovative and passionate barrier breakers. And I think it's only fitting to call this my life project because it's a project that I started in high school and have continued on throughout my entire life. So I graduated from UC Berkeley with a major in Media Studies and Native American Studies, an education minor. I am first generation. My mom never went to college. My dad didn't either. I hope not to be the last in my family to graduate from college. I come from a low-income, single-parent-ran household, and I am the proud daughter of immigrants. And the reason I say these things is because they are part of my identity and part of the way that I navigate the world and that I have navigated my education. As the daughter of an immigrant, you're kind of told not to question anything. You're told not to do the wrong thing because anything that you do or say could potentially harm your family and have like consequences that you do not want, right? And so I've had sort of that philosophy throughout my life, and in my education, up until when I was in high school, that's sort of the way I went about things, right? You go to school, you do as you're told, you take this test because that's what success is. If you pass it, if you get an A, you're being successful. And to me, education has always been this road to success, where I'm like, if I have this education, if I have this knowledge, if I'm able to get a really good job and get into a really good college, then I'll open opportunities and doors for myself, for my family, and for my community. And so today I'm talking about my college success portfolio defense, which I did in high school at Metropolitan Arts and Tech High School, where I stood up in front of teachers and was up there for an hour and a half, so a lot longer than this, defending my work and saying, I deserve to graduate, right? If I didn't do this presentation, I wouldn't graduate on stage. And so I was up there, and they asked me questions, and I told them, these are the 3 projects throughout my entire high school experience that I think will show you how great of a student I am and how I completed all of this stuff. And they asked me questions, and we went back and forth. And so they really wanted to understand, make sure that I understood what I'd learned, but that I was also ready for the future, right? So in my presentation here, I always show this picture because this is the moment that they told me that I passed and that I was going to graduate on stage. And I think that every student deserves to feel like this, you know, like about everything that they ever learn. And I think it was a reassurance for me that I had passed and I was going to graduate, but also I saw the growth in me, right? This was not the person that was up there my freshman year of high school, where I did a presentation, and every year we had exhibitions, and parents came, and teachers assessed us, and that's the way that we passed on to the next level. And I saw the growth in myself, right? And I saw the growth in every other student, and I feel like this is the way that you really should feel about your education all the time, right? Like I said before, I questioned things. I was like, this isn't the way that my education should feel, right? So there's a difference to me, right, between education and schooling, right? So school is where I go, take the test all the time, and then education is really where I'm like questioning things, and I say, well, why do I have to do this? What is it good for? And so I think that we need to engage students in meaningful projects that not only encourage them to seek answers to questions that they are passionate about, but later allowing them to creatively prove that they have retained the necessary knowledge, because I think that this creates self-confidence, agency, and a clear vision of who you are as students and leaders of your community. When we're in school for half of the day, right? School is not our lives. We have, as students, right? I know a lot of the times I, as a student, used to think my teachers have no life, that this is what they do. They're always in my classroom, and this is it, right? And I've heard a lot of the times that, actually, yeah, you're right. We grade papers even after class is over. But as a student, also, you're like, well, I also have a life, right? I have these things that I deal with. I go back home and I translate for my mom these really incredibly important papers, which I have no idea what they're talking about, but I translate them. I call the pizza guy whenever I need pizza because my mom doesn't know how to order pepperoni, cheese, whatever pizza, right? So these are things that I'm experiencing outside of school. But coming to school, I knew that I had agency. I didn't have agency over, like, should I translate this for my mom? Should I not? I had to, right? But when I came to my school, I was learning these things, and I knew that I had agency in choosing the ways that I wanted to learn and navigate my education. So one of the projects that I want to talk about is I did a research project in high school, my junior year, where I talked about, right now the content of it isn't as important as the process of it, but so essentially what I did was, it was a research paper, and I talked about the women's rights movement, and I got to compare it to a more modern issue going on in the Bay Area, which is where I'm from. And what I did there, I loved this project, and I still remember it to this day, so if you have questions about it, you can ask me afterwards. But I remember really, really loving this project because it paved the road for what I would then do for the rest of my life, right? I knew that I had a passion for women's rights and for the empowerment of women, because I cannot be truly empowered unless all women are empowered. And I realized that the women's rights movement had done a lot, right? But it hadn't done enough for all women. And this project really essentially paved the road for what I would then go on to do. I did a research paper. I know the content. I also got to present it to my class, and my class presented their papers and their projects, and it was really, really cool to see because we all had different interests, but we all came together and learned from each other, and I think that's what education should be. You should be able to express to me your interest, and I should be able to learn from it. And so when I went to college, I joined a organization called Hermanas Unidas, and this is an organization that predominantly helps Chicana Latina women but it's open door policy, so anyone can join. It helps you through your academics, you do community service, and you're also social and networking with everyone, and it's 18 chapters deep throughout California, but it was founded at UC Berkeley. And the reason I bring this up is because I didn't realize it at the time, right? But this is my passion, like being able to empower and be empowered by women. And I got to do this in high school. And had it not been for my high school experience, I think that I would still pursue it, right? I would still pursue it, but I wouldn't pursue it in the same way. When I was in college, again, I'm first generation. I had no idea what I was doing. In my classes, I was oftentimes like one of, so there's like what, 3,000 people in your class, right? And I was like one of like 100 people of color. And it was hard to be in those classrooms knowing that I don't know what your experiences are. I don't know what I'm doing here, really. And so I knew that in high school, I was able to combine my education with a passion that I had. And I knew that Hermanas Unidas was that for me in college, right? Because in college, they haven't adapted this idea of project-based learning and that it's important and that it's crucial in education. It's sort of very traditional. But I was able to survive because I found this sort of additional passion that I had, and I knew what it was like to do it in high school, so I was doing it again. When I was in college, I studied abroad in France for a summer, and I was part of the European Innovation Academy. So this was like a project that I had done in high school where I did go again outside of like my usual college experience, and I did a summer abroad program. But we basically got into a group. We started our own startup. We were solving a huge problem, right? One of the problems that we were solving was cultural competency in the workplace, and we developed this sort of gaming app that we thought businesses were needing and were going to buy. And so we got into this group, and it was essentially what I did in high school all over again. I got into a group, there was a huge problem that I had to solve, and I got to solve whatever problem I wanted to solve, but I still learned everything that I needed to learn about starting a startup, right? And we pitched it to funders too. It was sort of like a mock-up. It wasn't like we weren't actually going to get money for it, but still cool. And so the reason I bring all of these things up is because they've paved the road for me. I think that project-based learning, really what it does for students is it really engages you in your education. And I know that you hear the research and you hear sort of this, the steps for doing it, right? But at the end of the day, it's really all about the students, right? If it isn't affecting change within your students, then really, like, what's the point? And me, I've always liked school. Like I said, okay, not necessarily like school, but I knew that I needed to do well in school to succeed. And I think that the really cool thing about about project-based learning specifically, is that it's very individualized, right? Like I can be a student that loves to go to school. And it's sort of project-based learning for me when I started high school sort of started at this thing that I needed to do. I needed to sort of present, and I needed to do the research, and I needed to do all of this. But then it sort of turned into this thing that I wanted to do, where I was like, okay, this is me taking full agency. This is me showing my teachers that I'm confident. And by the way, the presentation that we did in high school, you could potentially do it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 times until you actually passed it. What passing looked like is if you didn't answer the questions that you needed to during your presentation, your teachers would ask you follow-up questions, and if you still didn't do it right, then they would still ask you questions. So they gave you opportunities to be able to succeed in different ways, right, and through different avenues. And what it does for me is my teachers hold me to a higher standard, so then I hold myself to a higher standard. They believe in me, so then I have to believe in myself. They see that I can be better, so I'm going to be better, right? And so I want to talk about my brother, Danny Armenta. So Danny and I, and the reason his head isn't on here is because he just didn't want his face there, I don't know why. So Danny and I are very, very different. Just imagine my face on there. We're actually twins. So him and I are very different students. Like I said, I always liked school. I've always just gotten good grades because I'm like, I need to do this, I need to do this. Danny, on the other hand, just wasn't into sort of this, I'm taking a test and I need to memorize this and I need to memorize that. And so my mom and I always thought, well, maybe school just isn't for Danny. Maybe he just Maybe he just doesn't like school, and that's fine, because school isn't for everyone. So in high school, we got the opportunity to do a work learning experience where half of the day for one day a week, we'd go to an internship of our choice, whatever we wanted to do, it was like during the week, so it was on a Thursday, I think. And so Danny took up an internship at this fashion design little youth center, and he worked with jeans, and he customized a whole bunch of clothing, and he would come home every day and be super, super excited about that. And the cool thing is that he was then taking everything that he learned here and applying it to the classes that he was taking, right? Because our school again made us do that, right? And so in his math classes, right, I don't know much about fashion and design, so I can't really speak to it, but the measurements, or in his art classes, he talked about colors and the way that they go together. So my mom and I really saw a difference in Danny, where I remember going to his college portfolio defense and his last defense, and he talked about this specific WLE experience, and he was so confident. I was like, wow, I am proud of Danny. Who is this person? I don't even know this person. He had full agency in what he was in the internship, right? There was agency in what he decided to learn about, and then afterwards, he had a clear vision of what he really wanted to do. So my brother now goes to SF State, and he's in his second year of college, and he's majoring in fashion and design merchandise. And if you look at my brother, you wouldn't think that he's in fashion and design. I mean, I don't know what a fashion and design person looks like, but he probably doesn't, he definitely doesn't look like I don't know. I mean, I personally do not think he's super fashionable, but he is so passionate about the work that he does. And who knows if he would have gotten this far in his college experience, and who knows if he'd be in college right now had he not had those experiences that he had in high school, where he had to stand up and defend his work and say hey, okay, look, this is my passion, and I have also done whatever is on your checklist, right? And so I am super, super proud of Danny, and I also think that really this shows how important project-based learning can be in the lives of all students, right? Because it's individualized. And Danny and I, again, are very, very different students. Different kind of students, in terms of the attitudes that we have towards regular schooling and education. But the turnout is just the same. I currently am finishing up a fellowship at Uber where in the diversity and inclusion team. So I know my passion, and I know where I want to go. And Danny also does. And I think that's incredible. And I think that, again, these things kind of start as something that you have to do, and you learn that actually this is what I need to do, and this is what I want to do because it's my passion, and it's who I really want to be. And so to end this off, first, I really want to thank everyone for having me here and for listening to what I have to say. Please ask me questions afterwards if you have them. More than happy to answer them. I want to end with this quote by Jane Elliott. I follow a lot of her work. I don't know if you all do, but she's great, so look her up. She said, one of the questions that they asked her was, when are you going to ever stop doing the work that you're doing? And she said, really, really never. She's solving a problem every day, and that's what we do every day of our lives. We solve these problems, whether they be really small, like I am going to be late, or I'm, huge, like eliminating racism from systems, right? And she said never, but she said that she holds on to hope, right? Which to her stood for holding on to positive energy. And I think that in the field that you are all in education, I think that's one of the main components. Because like Paul said, right, change isn't going to happen from one day to the next. You're not going to see this incredible change in your students from one day to the next. You may not even see it within the year, right? It took me 4 years to be able to accept this as a part of my learning process. And it took my brother 4 years as well to understand that this is how he grew. Right, so you're not going to see it right away. But I can promise you that if you keep students at the core of everything that you do, you can't go wrong. If you always have the best interest of the student, and you're all passionate about the work that you do, so it's important to just always keep the student at the core of everything. And I'm so happy that we have student panelists here today, because I think it's super important to always hear from students. And I want to thank you all for being so committed to this work. So thank you.
Thank you. That was awesome. was awesome. Thank you so much, Yvonne. That was absolutely fantastic. Thanks to all three of our keynote panelists today. Let's go to the question portion. If I may shift gears. Over the last 2 days here, I have been asked by a number of you 2 questions. One is, how do states get started in this? And the other question is, how do districts get started in it? So Paul, I'm going to start with you, and feel free for others to jump in, but what advice would you give to states today who want to get started in competency-based education and personalized learning?
I think that's a great question, Susan, and I think my answer might be slightly counterintuitive to many folks. I wouldn't actually recommend that states do it the way we did it in New Hampshire. When we started, there weren't many proof points out there, so we felt we had to essentially construct the way as we went forward. Now there's so much work going on out in the field, in our schools, in our communities. So many of you are involved in that work. So what I would recommend to a state chief and his key staff or her folks who are really trying to advance this kind of work, I'd suggest to them that they sit down with folks from the field, sit down with the folks who are the pioneers and the early adopters, and take a look at what they're doing and really study it, and then invite them to talk about what a new system would look like top to bottom, and co-construct it together.
You mentioned the 51st state paper that was published by Jean Wilhoit and Linda Pittenger and Linda Darling-Hammond too. Do you think that's a useful tool to go through? It's not necessarily a model to put on top, but it's a way to start the discussions.
Absolutely, as you know, we've had this debate about systems versus system of assessment. And what the 51st state paper describes is really a system of accountability and assessment that is comprehensive. It looks at state summative assessment, but it also looks at local formative assessment and summative assessment. And it creates a way in which that can all be a single system. And it's set up so that the state system does not hold back the incredible vitality of the new work that's emerging.
Yeah. Rose, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, I certainly would agree with Paul. I think at the district level and for district leaders and teachers doing this work, I really think it's important to build a capacity for leadership around this. In a lot of the work that we've begun in the last 10 years, we now have to think about scaling and sustainability in ways that we haven't when we first started. And so we have to think differently. It's a different lens on the work because we know that over time, teachers change, leaders change. So what actually sustains this into the future? You don't want to have new people coming into a district that will take you off course in really meeting what I consider a customized way of working with your students to bring them to college and career readiness. So I think you have to think in the long term, build a lot of leadership around it, and I include teacher leaders as the core of the leadership group within a district, working closely with the state and the state resources. In so many cases, there's so many state resources that are available that at the district level, you don't even know are there till you really pursue it. And so I think those are all really important pieces, especially at this point in time, where for many folks who've been doing this work for a while are really saying, how do we bring this to scale? How do we bring this to a district with 12,000 students or 15,000 students or 80,000 students? And so those are real problems. It's nice, I guess they're nice problems to have at this point, but we still have to move through those. So I think those are important considerations at the district level.
Thank you. And I want to shift a little bit. One of the things that we're starting to see more of is really in terms of student agency and ownership, having students involved in these processes of what does a successful graduate look like. Yvonne, what advice would you give to students who are going to a competency-based, student-centered school?
I think my advice, like I said in my keynote, I think that you start this off saying, this is what I need to do, like my teachers are making me do this, but they really wouldn't be making you do this if they didn't actually think that it worked. And I think my advice is to really try to find your passion, even if you aren't at this like amazing kind of school, right? Try to find your passion within your education, and even if you don't know, like, what is my passion? I don't think you ever figure that out. I mean, you do, but you never really figure it out always. You know, your passions you're always evolving, and I think it's okay to accept that you maybe don't know what you're doing. But my advice would be to just always to understand that your education is your own, right? That's the one thing that no one can ever take away from you. So why not make it the best that it can be, right? Like, yes, you're working within these systems, and I think that being at this kind of school will allow you to question things all the time, and don't be afraid to kind of question things. And why do I have to present in front of these people? What good is that going to do me? Because you will see it later on when you go to college and when you're pitching a project to your business partners or something. So my advice is just to keep going and really, really invest yourself in your education.
And I'm hearing from you too that the walls of the school are really broken down. So you have these opportunities in communities. So I'm wondering for kind of a follow-up question on the advice you would give to school leaders or districts wanting to get started. Rose, can I turn to you? You're working with a lot of districts, and then Yvonne and Paul weigh in. What advice would you say? I'm a superintendent or I'm a principal and I want to get started. Where do I start?
I think truly, and I think it speaks to what Yvonne just spoke to, know who your kids are. So it's easy to see a lot of different models and a lot of things that other people are doing in other districts, but that may not work for the culture of learning that you have in your district or your school. So know your kids, know what they need, support the teachers, you know, with time, with resources to do this work. So I think that's really at the heart of it.
I would add to that, I think that is the first piece, to know the students, but I would also add that know why you're making a change, to know the purpose. Jim Rickabaugh from Wisconsin talks a lot about this. If we have committed educators and a committed community and committed students who know why they want to do the kind of education and learning that they want to do, then so much is possible.
Yeah, I agree, and I think that, for example, when going into high school, like all my teachers knew that my mom was a single mom. My teachers knew that I was low income, and it sort of is knowing a lot about the community that you're serving, because these different aspects of our outside lives show up in our education, right? Like we may come to school super worried about what's happening at home. And so it's important to know these aspects and the way that they may affect how we take a test, or the way that it may affect how we're presenting ourselves. So it is really, really important. And again, also just being committed. You all didn't come into this work to have students pass a test and then go to, you know, it's not like this, right? You came to sort of inspire people, and I think that's what should be at the core.
Great. There's a question that hasn't come up in our different TED Talk panels. What does this look like for gifted education? I know you weren't expecting this question. I'm throwing a lot of new questions out this morning, but what does it look like? This is hard. In a traditional system, we have a one-size-fits-all. You might do gifted education, you might get tested. Like, how does this work?
That's a good question, because I think every mother and father thinks their child is gifted. So start there, and I think probably if we truly, you know, get to the basics of this in meeting every child's need, it doesn't make any difference whether you're gifted or not. We have to honor and respect what a child learns when they come to us. And if they already know it, then we have to engage them with where they are. And that's why learning progressions are so important, is our way of knowing as professionals exactly where they are. Education in life doesn't just happen in school anymore. We have generations of kids who've learned from their environment. from all the opportunities that are out there. And yet we think that the only thing they have to learn is in this fixed curriculum that we engage them on in school. So I like to de-emphasize the gifted part, because I think there's talents that we bring based on all of our experiences life to the classroom at different points. And if we truly do competency education in a very personalized way, we'll know that and we'll serve that.
Paul, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, I think that the focus really, and I think it may get to the next question you're going to get at, is how can we go deeper? How can students be engaged in authentic, real problems that really are going to create change, large-scale change in our country and in our world? I believe in the future we're going to see education be more directly involved in those large-scale problems. And students who have one particular gift or another particular gift, they will bring those gifts to those problems. And I believe that engaged and strong educators will be supporting them as they take on that great work.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I mean, for me, the only thing that I would add is the example of my brother and I, right, where we're at different points in our academic career, but we are both each able to grow in different ways, in completely different industries, you could say, right? But we're each serving our own purpose in whatever it is that we want to do. And I think that meeting students exactly like where they're at is the thing to do.
No, it's crucial, and meeting students where they are is really difficult in the way that we have set up the traditional system, and that's one of the most important areas if you look at the learning sciences research too, and meeting students where they are academically and if they're ready, and social emotionally, and giving them the opportunities to really go deep on areas and even solve complex problems in their own communities and their own school. It's really exciting. Now, let's take a step back. If you were to fast forward, I'm just going to say 5 years. It could be 5, it could be 10 years. What would wild success of transformation towards student-centered learning look like in 5 years? I mean, what would you describe as a new system of education? What would it look like?
I would just say from a state perspective that wherever a student and a family live in that state, that they would have the opportunity to be fully engaged in a student-centered, personalized, competency-based learning system, and that it would be readily available to them, and that the educators in their community would support their students as they go forward. I think it's time now to think about scale. We definitely are thinking about that in New Hampshire. We see the path to that scale. And when I look around the room here, I see how so much of that is possible. Maybe 5 years, maybe 10 years, but we should never give up on accomplishing it.
I think in my own mind, I think as we do this work, I try to really emphasize with folks the need for coherence. How do these pieces that we're working on fit together? We have to strive to have them fit together seamlessly. You have to start somewhere, and it seems that when you start with something, you put all of your energy into that, and sometimes you lack the vision or the ability to see what it's connected to. And I think that evens out over time as you do this work. But I think, after, in 5 years from now, I'd like to see a whole lot more coherent systems that work around these personalized pathways for kids to learn in.
I don't know if 5 or 10 years from now, but I think wild success to me looks like my story and my education and that of my peers, like the class that graduated with me, is not exceptional, right? Like everyone's doing this kind of work, and everyone knows exactly what I mean when I'm saying, oh, I'm going to present my college portfolio defense, or oh, did you get these to proficient because you need to present these, or oh, you're going to be questioned, so know exactly what you're talking about, right? I think that these are things that I see everyone being able to do, because that's essentially what you do when you go to work. As a fellow at Uber, I've been I do research, and I have sort of built project plans and then presented them to my boss. And so this is like real life. It's what you do. So I think that if we're all able to be prepared years before, then that's what wild success to me looks like.
We started the conversation yesterday too, also looking at the future of work and the future of jobs, and things are, the jobs of the future, many of them have not been created. I mean, the fact that you work at Uber is like
And it's so
something
cool
that wasn't around.
Yeah, you get to
10 years
create your
ago,
own
right?
passions, and you get to create solutions to problems that you live in your daily life and that everyone probably also lives, so.
And it's been great to hear the examples from beginning with competency-based transcripts and thinking about that. I mean, I think there are some key themes that have been running through. One is a transcript that is truly meaningful, that depicts the full range of skills and knowledge. And just hearing about your graduation defense, I mean, that was more than a handshake. That was the commitment and the confidence of the entire community around you, like preparing you and sending you to this great future at the University of California and beyond, and thinking about the importance of the educator preparation. And Paul, you really hit it home on, if, you know, with Arnie's quote, like if we can't trust our professional educators with professional judgment on this work, then what are we doing in our K-12 education system in America? We have got to build that capacity. We have got to make it happen. And we've got to make the shift towards performance assessment. So can we ask, like, how can we better empower students to own and advance their own learning?
Well, I think teachers are under such pressure in the standards-based environment that we've been in for so long. To cover those standards. They're evaluated on how they cover those standards. I think we have to push past that, and we have to think of the teacher taking on that different role where the students own their learning. So that's a huge shift. So to me, that's really where we're going to see a big difference, is instead of the teacher owning the learning, the kids owning their own learning.
Paul?
Yeah, I'd maybe say the same thing in another way, but I think that having the work in the center with the student and educators supporting students as they engage in that work is the right attitude, if you will, the right positioning, and that's a change for many educators. I will say one of the biggest issues that we've had in PACE, for example, has been over-scaffolding, where educators really want to make sure that students get this.
Yeah, that's right.
And not let them kind of grapple with the problem so that they can become more and more comfortable grappling with the problem. So I think that's a learning experience over time that educators gain as they really take on the right attitude, if you will, in this learning.
And I think that to truly empower students to pursue their passions. And I always say that students and teachers, at least at the high school level, you know, I don't know, you know, how this would work, but I think that we're people, right? We're both people, and I think you're correct in saying that there's a shift in where students are owning their educations now, and I am empowered when I am able to know about your passions and about what makes you want to be a teacher, what makes you want to be someone that then inspires me, right? So I think that's sort of you empower when you're self-empowered, but also you do the same for others, right? So I think that if you are able to show me, sort of talk to me about like what your passions are and really show me that through when you're teaching me, when you're talking to me, that empowers me to be like, oh, I want to be just like that. And maybe not necessarily about what you're passionate about, but about this different thing that I have going on.
So thank you. So thank you all for pushing us into understanding what is possible and what is happening and what the future can look like. So please join me in thanking our TED Talks, our keynote panelists this morning. Enjoy the rest of your mornings, and we will be back here for our student panel at lunchtime. Thank you.